Hi folks, good evening and thank you so much for joining me. I know that topics like the one we're going to be looking at today, which is part 2 of the impact of state homes, abuse in the state homes, abuse taking place, abuse occurring and abuse occurring for several decades, if not more than a century in these state homes. That's the issue on the table before us, and it has been a very heavy topic. So last week we would have had acting superintendent Claire Guy Allen from the Child Protection Unit and the former Children's Authority Chairman Hanif E.A. Benjamin. And I know that for some of you it was an extremely frustrating interview because you felt that what you were hearing was only about the problems and not necessarily about the solutions. So I thank you for joining me last week and I thank you for joining me again this week. So let me hail out some of you before we get into the content this evening. Hi Anne, how are things up in Toko? Hi Nicole, hi Lenlise, hi Edithan or Edithan? I hope I got it correct. Renee, Javon, Sharon, Diane Agard, Zion Benjamin, Ayana Marshall, Michelle, Paula, Barton, Romeo. How is it up on the hill this evening, Michelle? Hi, Barbara. Hi, Danielle. Hi, Michael. Hi, Stacy. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Kareem. And everyone else who's here. I think my volume is fine, but I guess I can raise the volume some more. Let me know if this is loud enough for everyone. Let me know if you're hearing me. Hi, Paulina. Thanks for the shout out to Starboy. Starboy is currently is this loud enough? I've put it up pretty high. Good, thanks. Starboy currently in timeout because he was giving me a set of stress in the studio this evening. Normally he will, after a bit of playing he will calm down, but this evening he was real energetic, so I had to put him in timeout, and I will eventually go out and put him through his paces so that he will burn some energy. I mean, it is one of the things that I have to anticipate with his particular breed mixture. Good. So, couple of things. We started discussing this last week Sunday, and in today's Express there was a story about the 1997 Sabga report. And in that story, I don't know how many of you saw this story. The story pointed out that the report was actually suppressed. Now, there are multiple reasons that I felt that report was interesting. One, because when Minister Ayanna Webster Roy put out her report 2 or 3 weekends ago in the Parliament, one of the first things the opposition leader said was, here was a report that was 5 months old, somewhere thereabouts, because the report was completed somewhere around December last year, and the government sat on it for 5 months. And I felt that she was right to point that out, that it had taken 5 months for the report to be put into the public domain. And then I find out that the Sabga report was stifled. So Kamla Prasad Bissessa would have been at that point in time Minister of Education. So of course education would have a direct interaction with these various homes. The homes would have fallen under social development. But here was a report that had been commissioned by a government that she sat on as a cabinet minister. And the report wasn't tabled and put into the public domain 1 month, 5 months, 6 months, 10 months, a year after it had been done. The report was stifled. And the report was stifled for more than 20 years. It was commissioned in 1997, and it has only surfaced now in 2022 because somebody leaked versions of it. Somebody leaked a sanitized copy of it And because that sanitized copy was leaked and I had access to it, and apparently the Express also got their hands on it, the public is now hearing about some of the things that took place. So now I have a question for Kamla. And this is Kamla Persad-Bissessar, who has often positioned herself as the mother of the nation, as somebody who is very invested in the future of children here in Trinidad and Tobago. Why did the government that you are a part of stifle this report? Why was the report never put out into the public domain? Why were the findings and the recommendations never acted on? And why is it that the entire commission went mum and mute after having submitted the report? Because this isn't a report that anybody acted on at all. And what you're finding out is from 1997 to now, and please don't get me wrong, don't think that I'm saying that these things only started in 1997. The report would have uncovered things that would have been happening before 1997, right? A lot of abuse, a lot of atrocities before 1997. So if you find out these things by 1997, why not do something about it? Because then what happens is another generation and another cycle of abuse takes place, neglect and abuse. And what you are, and what I am coming to a very sober realization of, is that within these institutions, these various state homes, it has been generation after generation after generation of trauma, neglect, and abuse. So why am I making these comments about trauma, neglect, and abuse? Simple, basic. We get up every day and we look at the headlines in the newspapers. On Friday, I showed you some of the headlines. I showed you like 3 weeks worth of headlines from The Guardian, and how all it's showing you is how much violence and bloodshed and murders and, a lot of depressing news. So you have generations, multiple generations of youngsters, of children, our most vulnerable in society, ending up in these state homes. These are children who would have experienced sexual abuse in their own family homes. These are children who would have experienced loss of parents within their homes and a range of other issues, and by the courts, and also in some instances from their parents, they would have been put into these state institutions. And they get into these state institutions, and based on the report that I would have read, it was a life of neglect and abuse. So when you see these children grow up to become adults after experiencing neglect, abuse, and trauma their entire childhood, tell me what kind of adults you think we're going to have. And based on the report that I read this afternoon, and well, not read this afternoon, read in the last couple of weeks, and other things that would have been said to me by various persons who were at these homes, whether as employees or as children, based on the things that I would have heard there, is multiple generations of this thing taking place. So if you have multiple generations of children growing up to become adults who have experienced that kind of trauma, neglect, and abuse, what kind of society do you think we're developing here? What kind of society should we be expecting? And why are we expecting a different kind of society when we are sowing particular kinds of seeds? So what exactly are we hoping to reap if that is what we sow in, right? So let me, because I did promise to read excerpts from the report. So I'm going to read a couple excerpts from the reports here. And then we are going to go into an interview. And I want from now to let everybody know what I'm going to be reading for you, and also what you're going to be listening to by way of the interview from the young man who was sexually abused in one of these homes, is going to be graphic, and it is likely to be triggering. So I am letting you know now the information I'm going to read out and what you're going to hear in the interview is likely to be graphic and triggering. So please, if you know that conversations and discussions about abuse are likely to trigger you or to get you upset or to get you worked up, I am giving you fair warning that perhaps this is not the live that you want to listen to. So today's express story would have talked about a nun in a particular home. So I'm going to read some of the actions and recommendations that the task force back then in 1997 gave. And what I want you all to understand is this. If this person was responsible for a home back in 1997, then it means that she would have presided over a particular period of abuse then. So by 1997, she has already presided over abuse of children, and now they're asking for her to be removed, and you will find out whether or not she was removed. So this is, I'm not going to go with the person's first name, I'm only going to go with the person's last names, Sister Xavier. It is the opinion of every single member of the task force, without exception, that Sister Xavier presents a clear and present danger to the children at St. Jude. So this is part of the actions and recommendations for St. Jude's home. And that she must be removed immediately. She is beyond question guilty in the extreme of reckless and criminal endangerment, often resulting in bodily harm, physical and psychological abuse and torture, abuse of power and professional incompetence with criminal implications. She may also quite possibly be guilty of malfeasance, relating especially to the new building under construction, although this requires a proper audit to verify. So alarmed and concerned did the members of the task force become, based on both the physical evidence and the many corroborated reports encountered, that the chairman sought an urgent meeting with His Grace Archbishop Pantin. At that meeting, members of the task force sensitized His Grace to the grave nature of their findings and conclusions regarding St. Jude and Sister Xavier, and indicating their strong recommendation that her employment be terminated with immediate effect. His Grace, in turn, indicated that he was aware of strong concerns regarding Sister Xavier, and that he had had many complaints and reports over the years about her. All you understand, this is a report in 1997. And the head of the Catholic Church at that point in time is saying, well, yeah, we've been hearing about reports. Why was nothing done prior to 1997? All right. So he had had many complaints and reports over the years about her, which in turn he had forwarded to her superiors, as he had to follow certain protocols. He had assumed that some action had been taken, but the task force presentations indicated that obviously this was not so. To his credit, he then gave the commitment that he would, with immediate effect, see to Sister Xavier's removal as manageress at St. Jude. The task force left with a sense of profound relief, since many individuals had indicated that His Grace would waffle and skirt around the issue. At the time of this writing, however, Sister Xavier still operates at St. Jude. When contacted about this, His Grace indicated that he had done all he could within the purvey of his power, but that the problem now lay with the statutory board, which is the government agency that employed her. And I want to pause here. Many of the employees at these homes are actually state employees or employed by the statutory authorities service commission, which means that technically they're public servants. And so they are protected and continue to be able to assert their rights as protected workers. And so it becomes difficult to fire them even after they have done things that may even be criminal. So he says, I continue, he is not in a position, therefore, to do any more than he had, which was to liaise with her superior and solicit her support in the matter, support which he says he received despite a rallying of opposition from senior members of the Carmelite order. That being as it may, the bottom line is that Sister Xavier is still in charge at St. Jude, legitimately or otherwise, since her last contract ended in December 1996 and has not been renewed, and the reign of terror continues. Now, you might be wondering, how come I'm not sharing my screen so that you can see the documents themselves? And in some instances, the names of people who were then children are here on these pages. And their names as having experienced abuse and the kinds of abuse they would have experienced here on these pages. And I don't want to reveal their identities. So I'm being very careful about not revealing the identities of victims. So that's why I have not shared, like, I normally share my screen with you. That's why I have not shared my screen with you. So I'm continuing. Further to these events, the task force has uncovered some disconcerting information regarding Sister Dominic. Sources at the UWI who administered the childcare and counseling program she took there indicated the following. 1. She took 6 years to complete a 3-year course. 2. Her completion certificate was given under duress because, in the opinion of her examiners, she was undeserving of the award. So imagine that. This report is saying that the university gave her a certificate under duress even though they felt she was not deserving. And 3, it was the expressed opinion of those who trained her that she had very serious psychological and emotional problems that manifested themselves throughout her program of study. Now, after reading, this is just one page that I've read here. One page where you've gone to the head of the church to say, we have a problem with the person that's running this particular home. And everybody's saying, we hands tied, we can't fire the person, we can't discipline the person, we can't do anything here. A task force has this kind of information and it doesn't even end up in the hands of the police so that she can answer questions, because here, as I read earlier on in the actions and recommendations, the task force certainly felt that she was possibly guilty of criminal behavior. So let me continue. Corporal punishment is rampant and brutal. This is at the same St. Jude's home, right? The task force was shown a corridor leading to the music room, and I'm going to be describing physical abuse. So I'm warning you, I'm going to be describing physical abuse. The task force was shown a corridor leading to the music room where whipping is done. The L-shaped corridor is sealed at both ends by locked wrought iron gates. Children are reportedly whipped with curtain wire, belts, slippers, and even aluminium strips from suspended ceiling assemblies. So like ceiling fans. One Miss Samuel is alleged to be the supervisor who does the most brutal beatings, followed by Miss DeMills. The task force got several reports of a particular incident where one girl was stripped and beaten 65 times in the corridor and then had her head shoved in a bucket of water. Another report involved a young girl who was whipped mercilessly with curtain wire. This particular girl, who was interviewed 3 times, is very small and frail and it is alleged has a heart condition. One girl was reportedly held in the corridor for 2 weeks as punishment. Excuse. Yet another girl was hit in the face with a big paintbrush by Sister Xavier during a heated argument. This apparently is a common occurrence. As noted above, food deprivation is often used as punishment for a variety of wrongs, such as failure to do chores, failure to say prayers, etc. Verbal and psychological abuse are also rampant. Sister Xavier accuses girls who run away of going to meet man and other kinds of man talk. She accuses girls who are especially close of being lesbians and has them separated, so close friendships rarely develop. The most common verbal threat, as mentioned earlier, is to have the girls sent to either Golden Grove or to the Belmont police station. Girls who are non-Christian, for example Muslim and Hindu, and who suffer some accident or misfortune are told sarcastically by Sister Xavier that they are being punished by God, supposedly, for praying to the wrong God or being in the wrong religion. That is discrimination and abuse. Also, if they do not attend Mass on a Sunday, they are verbally abused and denied the opportunity to see their parents when parents visit. Now, all of these things are denying children their rights. It is a state home funded by taxpayers' dollars. You don't get to tell children what religion they can be or what religion they're going to practice. Because if the home is taking in children across the board, then obviously you're going to get children at these homes that are non-Catholic. How can you be discriminating against them and abusing them on the basis of their religion? That is crazy. Crazy. So, having exhausted the politically correct option of trying to have Sister Xavier retired via the Catholic Church, the task force has no option but to make the following strong recommendations. With immediate effect, Sister Xavier should cease to be in any way allowed to manage, operate, or seek to influence the management or operation of any aspect or facet of St. Jude. I don't think that it ended immediately based on the report. It took some time before she was eventually sent somewhere else. So I wanted to give you an updated account of St. Jude's. And this is from somebody who is a member of, who works at St. Jude or worked at St. Jude at a point in time. So let's call her Mary. Mary says, St. Jude's School for Girls is divided into 5 houses, with the intake house, which has the largest population, and a house which was formerly known as the rehab, which has the lowest population. The culture of the girls at St. Jude's is the bullied soon become the bullies. All the aggressive girls, a total of 3, are housed in one unit. They can't assimilate with the other population because they are very aggressive. They throw objects at staff and at other girls, and according to my source, she says lesbianism is rampant. She says most girls are not virgins but pretend or fall into character of being a bird to the other girls as a form of protection. At times, over and over again, myself included, have pandered to these bullies with the hope that we can go home without bruises or without being beaten up. With the policy of payment per child, these girls are not sent to YTRC as they should be. And this is an important point to note, that many of the homes don't send the girls on to the YTRC facility if they have done something criminal, because their funding is dependent on how many girls and boys they have at their institutions. So the fewer girls and boys you have there, if you've passed on your awards to another institution, you're not going to be getting the same funding. And so to be able to continue to receive the same funding, according to the employee here, they don't report any of the criminal behavior, or they don't send the girls and boys on if they have done anything criminal. So to continue, right, so with the policy of payment per child, these girls are not sent to YTRC as they should be, because apparently the institution is not in receipt of proper funding. If they were sent there after each fight, maybe the others would be wary of such aggressive behavior. The girls are no longer searched on their return from school as mandated by the Children's Authority, so weapons such as sharpener blades are rampant. They use it to self-harm and tattoo themselves and tattoo each other. In retrospect, from my time there to now, the children are running things. They shout, they curse us, they hit us with toilet bowl seats. Staff show their bruises from head to toe. Sometimes they leave with their clothes ripped down. Usually when a fight occurs between children, the security is asked to assist. The girls have found a way to overcome this by stripping off all clothes in preparation for a fight. With the new things of male caregivers, it is totally inappropriate for males to be working within the household because all of their private parts are exposed. So males also can't work by themselves. So basically, because the writing here is a little bit convoluted. But the point that the source is trying to make is that when the girls are going to fight, they strip down naked, and they know, because once they've stripped down naked, the male caregivers or the male assistants at the home can't get involved. They can't part a fight, because it means that they will come into contact with the bodies of young girls, and so of course that means that it's only the female caregivers who can try to part the fights. Also, supervision isn't equally shared because, of course, because it's a female institution, you have to have women on each of the shifts all the time. So also, so supervision isn't equally shared. Sleep time, bath time is our time as female supervisors. We must do double shift if only a male relieves us of duty, because a male cannot be allowed to work alone. And then she goes on to talk about infrastructural issues. She says the building is not upgraded because we are moving 5 years now. The sounds of bullets riddle the night in Belmont. The nuns have moved out, leaving an abandoned building to the front with full view of the girls, an entire compound to the back, and anyone can access this building. The positives, she says, are if the girls want to study mechanics, they can. If they want to be nail technicians, they can. If they want to do academics, they can. Anything that is positive, management and staff promote it. And then, of course, there are staffing issues. A lot of the staff are waiting on gratuity 5 years now. Some are on month-to-month contract with no leave, so of course they're afraid to take time off. And then in her closing paragraph, she says, do staff abuse children? Yes. Some, a very few, I would say, 2 in particular, curse them. But those 2, when trouble brewing, is they that quiet down the fights, pull out the staff that getting beat up. Maybe it's because the girls come from an environment where mommy cursed them. I don't do it. Now, thus far, I have heard very little in any of the reports or accounts about counseling or therapy. I've heard nothing about that. Now I want to move to talking about St. Dominic's home. And I'm going to read a bit from St. Dominic's home, and then we're going to go into the account from the young man. So this is from the report. While the degree of ineptitude and abuse was not as immediately clear at St. Dominic's as it was at St. Jude's, The testimonies of several members of staff who met with the task force outside of the compound, in addition to the testimony of Father Gervais Giraud, who has been with the home since 1979, make it evident that it is still significant and alarming. The incidents involving Mr. Thomas and Miss Swan, and especially Mr. Peters, clearly implicate the management of the home in the most negative manner. Stated differently, those managing the home are culpable morally and legal for the past and present abuse of the children and staff. Indeed, sister, and the nun's first name is mentioned, indeed, the head nun's handling of the Peters affair alone qualifies her for immediate dismissal as manager. As manager, as indeed she would have been were she employed anywhere in the private sector. It is simply not enough that she made Mr. Peters resign once his sexual abuses were exposed. The fact that she would allegedly give him a recommendation and support him in getting a job at St. Anne's after the heinous things he committed with not one or two, but 30 to 40 of the boys in her care is an outrage, and that it was swept under the carpet to save the home public embarrassment and negative press reports is equally outrageous. In our local newspapers, it is not uncommon to see a man being sentenced to 15 years for serious indecency with a minor, one minor. Given the enormity of his crime, Mr. Peters would in any other society be branded a monster of the worst kind, and he would be put away for life. Primarily for this reason, what makes the nuns most culpable in this instance, though, is that she failed to provide immediate, meaningful, therapeutic intervention, both medical and psychological, for the children involved. This alone makes her party to their abuse and to their ultimate psychological destruction. So I'm going to pause here, and we are going to move on to the interview. So this young man would have seen some of the screenshots I put up on social media last weekend about the report, that 1997 Sabga report. And he reached out and indicated that he was one of the persons in that group of 30 to 40 boys that was abused, and he wanted to tell his story. He wanted to give his story. So I'm now going to switch over to his interview. It was pre-recorded because I needed to be able to disguise his face and disguise his voice, because he is an adult now, having moved on with his life, but he wanted to share his story with the public. So again, let me warn you in advance that you're going to be hearing about some graphic details about abuse at a home. Karen, okay, sure. Good evening, and thank you so much.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Sure.
So I'm going to let a lot of this be you and your voice. Where I feel it's necessary to come in with a question, I'll come in with a question. But outside of that, I'm going to let it be your voice. So as best as you can, if you can tell me, what are your first memories of being at the St. Dominic's home? How did you end up being at the St. Dominic's home as a ward of the state?
Okay, well, based on my recollection, most of what I'm going to say here in relation to how I ended up being there is based on what I would have been told as an adult, right? There were some issues at home, and I've never really been told what the real issues were, but I was told that the police had gotten involved, the social welfare, and I believe the courts had gotten involved. And as a result, myself and my elder brother, we were sent to the St. Dominic's Children's Home in Belmont, which had been referred to a long time as the orphanage. Once I hear the orphanage, the St. Dominic's Home is referring to, right? I would have been a baby because I could remember being in the nursery. There's a section called nursery where babies kept, and then when you reach a certain age, they send you off to different, what they call departments, but we refer to it as housing units for people to more understand what it is. Where there's a dormitory section, right? That's like between, it's like when you're like about 5, 6, 7, between 5 and let's say about 12, no, 5 and about 15, they keep you in that particular section. And then when you're a bit older, just before you reach the age 18 or 17, 18, time to leave, or 16, they would send you to what they refer to as the big boys department, right? Yeah, so there were like 2 big boys department, one named St. Thomas and one named St. Andrews. So when I was removed from the nursery, I was sent to the St. Martin's department. It's an all boys unit.
When you
Right?
say unit, so it's like a dormitory. So it would be. Is it like a dorm, or is it
It's much more. It's much more than a dorm. Right? The department is much more than a dorm. So let me try to explain. So St. Dominic's, St. Martin's basically bridges with Dominic Savio. Now most of the apartments are named after saints, because it's a Roman Catholic run institution, right? So you have St. Dominic Savio, you have St. Martin's, you have St. Thomas, you have St. Andrews, you have Margaretti, and so forth, right? So I was at St. Martin's, and the settings there is like, when you enter, right, you have like the television area, where there are chairs, seating accommodation, there's a TV where the children could watch television, then there's a dining room right next door, and then not along a corridor, there's the washroom facilities, right? With a large face basin, a long face basin, where we brush our teeth, etc. And then there's the dormitory, right? The dormitory where the beds are, where everyone sleeps. It's an open area, it's not closed or closeted or anything like that. And that's on the upper floor. And the lower floor now, the ground floor, is where the bathrooms are located there. And also there is what we used to call I forgot the name of but that's where we would eat, right? Where the tables and stuff for you to have your breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner downstairs there. And also in that area downstairs there's space for where you would have your school shoes, you hang your school clothes, your school bags, etc. on the ground floor. Then on the outside now, there's the yard. It's a huge compound, a very, very large compound. So down on the St. Martin section borders with Dominic Savio, right? 2 separate sections with one big building, right? So their settings are similar to St. Martin's. You can access St. Martin's and Dominic Savio. Yeah.
right? And Dominic Savio also had boys.
Dominic Savio is also a boys department as well.
Around the same age group as well.
Age group, that's correct. About 5 to 15.
Right. Okay, so you moved from the nursery into St. Martin's at the age of 5, and so what was your experiences like at that point in time? What do you remember of your time at the institution then?
Right. So at St. Martin's now, I would have sent to there's a primary school in the compound as well. That is called St. Martin's RC Primary School. Right, so when you come into the compound, that's the first thing you meet actually. The school compound is at the bottom of the hill, right? So I was at the kindergarten at the St. Martin's RC Primary School, and then from there I would have gravitated to Standard 1, Standard 2, Standard 3, Standard 4, Standard 5. Actually, I sat common entrance while I was there, right? So my experience at St. Martin's it was like a sort of a family settings. There was only 2 male staff worked at the department, and the others were female staff. One, an elderly guy had called Mr. Joseph, right? He's a very, very nice person, and then another one who had called Mr. Junior Dexter Peters. He was a much young person, and he was someone that everyone wanted. We saw him as a role model. He was young, he was very young. He was bright because, he was the one who would help us with our schoolwork, pick us up with our 2-time tables, 3-time tables, 4-time tables and stuff. He was really, really, really bright. And not just that, he was past resident of the home as well too. So we definitely saw him as a role model. He was one of the persons at the St. Martin's department. He was assigned to work St. Martin. So there were different, not supervisors they call them, I can't remember what they refer to them as, right? But the different staff members who would have been assigned to different departments, and that would be the management of the home would be the ones that decided to move them. But most of the time they're not moved. Most of the time they're there for a very lengthy period, right? So then you have like a head mistress. She would be the head of the department. So she comes like the supervisor. She's the person in charge of the entire department, right? So I remember her. She was a very nice person. Miss Thelma Golsterben was her name, and a no-nonsense person, but very, very nice person. I mean, if you get trouble, you will get your little spanking, I would just want to mention, with Mr. Peters, right, as I said, he was the only male person at the St. Martin's department.
He was the only person, because you said there was an elder.
Yes, sorry. He was the only young male person, right? And he used to beat badly. He used to beat bad. He used to beat with a leather belt. So while we look at him as a role model, we were fearful of him as well too. Because if for some reason, he start to pick you up in your 2 timetables and you miss, you're gonna get licks. He's gonna beat you very bad. And there are times he would refer when he's calling you, he would say, "Bring your mother cunt here," So he was at times verbally abusive where that is concerned, So I'll tell you this: the management, they were aware that he used to beat badly. They were all aware, but perhaps they saw that as a necessary evil. I mean, now that I've grown, I have an understanding as to what would have transpired and what would have been the thinking, because they knew he used to beat, because people complain a lot about him beating, and
perhaps we should give the audience a sense of what years you were there for, because I mean, you saying common entrance kind of gave things away, right?
Yes, definitely.
Say SEA and we don't say common entrance.
Yes, you don't say common entrance anymore.
If you could give the audience a sense of the years in which you were there, so they have a time frame for when you were there.
Yeah. So based on my recollection, as I said, in the stages, I was there as a baby, and I would have remained there till, I believe, 12, 13, somewhere thereabout, right? I was discharged from the institution. So I did sit common entrance while I was there. Not too long after common entrance, I was discharged from the institution and placed into the care of my mom.
What year did you sit common entrance then?
That would have been... I can't recall the year, but that would have been... Would it have been 1995 or 1994? I can't remember. I knew it was in the 90s.
Alright. Okay.
But I can't remember the exact year.
Okay. So you would have been. Do you remember the year you left the home? What year did you leave the home?
Right, I would have left the home sometime in 1997, between 1997 and 1996, 1997, somewhere thereabout, yeah. I would have left, yes.
Right. So you're saying that you are in St. Martin's house. There are multiple caregivers there. There's a headmistress who's responsible for the house. There are 2 male caregivers, one a senior, one younger. Were there other caregivers besides that one female and the 2 males?
Yes, there were. The others were female, like about 3 or 4 others, because they work like a 8-hour shift. So like the shifts were like 6 to 2, 2 to 10, and like that. So that's how the shifts actually worked here. So there was Miss Judy, Miss Quashy, yeah, and another person, I believe, yeah.
And so you did everything on the compound. Your education, everything was taking place there on the compound.
Yes, that's quite correct. Actually, one of the things that I was sent on the outside to do, because at a point in time while they realized that I had loved music, playing music, so they had sent me to the Brass Institute. I'm not even too sure if they're around anymore, right? The brass institute. So I had started to play the guitar because I love the guitar and I realized I was musically inclined. So it was easy for me to like play a saxophone, clarinet, a keyboard, it was really, really easy. Once you're musically inclined, you could like play almost any instrument. So that was the only thing I used to go on the outside for, which was the brass institute. Now what normally happens, right, after common entrance is sat, right? Obviously, most people would pass for schools on the outside. So they will be sent to the schools on the outside. So you go to the school on the outside from the morning, then they come back in the evening. A lot of the boys actually went to the Belmont Boys Intermediate School. That's just right around the corner, right? And then a lot of the girls went to the St. Martin's Girls High School, which is a little further up the road, closer to just on Bel Air Road. It's actually close to the compound because the compound is a very large compound. So if you pass through the back gate, you can get to the St. Martin's Girls High School really easy.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
So, around when did you start to, I guess, experience physical abuse and verbal abuse from Mr. Peters?
Right, so the physical abuse, I wasn't the only person the verbal abuse, I wasn't the only person subjected to the verbal abuse because he would make those comments to almost anyone, but he had his favorites. There's no doubt. So the elder guys, so even though this dormitory is for the department is for about 5 to let's say 12, but 5 to 15, somewhere thereabout, they would be the elder ones, right? So the more older ones in the dormitory, in the department. So he had a close relationship with a lot of the older children there. So, as I said, the verbal abuse was always there, and the physical abuse would have started. I didn't say common entrances yet.
Okay, so you would have still been
right?
in primary school.
I was still at the primary school.
And the
Yes,
physical
I believe
abuse?
I was in standard 5 because I remember my teacher was Mrs. Ledgerwood. Very, very nice teacher. I remembered her good. And the principal of the school was Mr. Walker. He's now deceased. And the vice principal was Miss Barrow. So you see, there are things that I actually remembered from my days at the school, yeah.
So,
And Sister Bernard, yeah.
So, Karen, what would prompt him to beat? If you can remember, if you do remember, on the occasions that you were beaten, what were you beaten for?
You were like beaten for Mr. Peters for like the most simplest things. If your clothes is not, your bed is not made up properly, in a certain way, you get licks. If you come back from school, your shirt is out of your pants, you'll get licks. For the most simplest things. We have little children, we'll go outside to play sometimes. So if you go outside right in the yard, which is right there to play, without saying or asking something, you will get licks. You get licks almost to the most simplest things. You make mess while you're eating, you're going to get licks.
Okay.
And we did got a lot of licks.
But that's not the only kind of abuse you suffered.
No. And let me just add this too. On the shifts, when the shifts are worked, it's just one staff member per shift. So if Mr. Peters is working the 6 to 2 shift, it's just him alone. Now the headmistress would usually come during the morning time between somewhere 8 to 4. So she would be there like Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. If needs be, she would come on a weekend, if there are activities, etc., to overlook it and stuff. So there would be one person there. So when we sleep at night in the dormitory, there is one staff member there. There's a staff room, which is right next to the dormitory. You can literally walk from the bed right there. The door, just a simple room, you just open the doors open, the staff room is there, there's a bed, that's where the staff members would sleep. So if he's working the 10 to 6, it's just him alone with approximately, let's say about 15 to 20 children, boys, I should say, in the department at one time.
Okay, so there would not be other adults around?
No, there would not be other adults around. Only if the headmistress is there between the 8 to 4 shift, she would be there, most of the time.
So that's the
Jude,
only time
it's
there would be an overlap. If the headmistress is
Yes.
around,
Yes.
she will be there while whoever else is on shift is there.
Is there? Yes, that's quite correct. Yes, and that's usually during the daytime, Monday to Friday, 8 to 4. As I say, on a weekend, if there's activities and she sees fit to come, she would come out.
When did the sexual abuse begin?
Well, as I said, I did not sit common entrance yet because I distinctly remember that I was in standard 5, and there were times when you're asleep at night. The thing of these incidents all happen at night, right? When Mr. Peters is actually working the night shift, right? So, if you only wink and you're not sleeping, you get licks. So Mr. Peters used to make sure everybody is sleeping. As children, we are a little bit agitated, etc. You would be, you're just not ready to sleep yet, But Mr. Peters said to go to bed. Time to go to bed, you have to go to bed. So sometimes I would have observed and didn't really pay it any mind that there were times he would wake up certain persons, as I said, more elder adults, but not more than one at a time. And he would go downstairs with them.
So he
Now,
would wake up
downstairs.
He'd wake up an older boy. Is that okay?
Yes, that's correct. And he would go downstairs with them. And when he goes downstairs, well, everybody's in the bed. Nobody's coming out of bed because Mr. Peters is on shift. Mr. Peters is working. He would go downstairs with them, and he would be there for a significant amount of time with them. Downstairs is dark, right? Because you could see the steps, you could see the staircases there, you can see if lights are on or not, right? Then there were times he would go in the staff room with some of the older persons. And I must add too that there were also times that with the approval of the management of the home, because this could not have happened without the approval of the management, Mr. Peters would, on weekends, go home with some of the boys and they would spend weekends home by him.
Okay.
So, as I said, it didn't happen. It happened just, I didn't sit common entrance yet. I was in standard 5. I was preparing for common entrance. And there was some time I was asleep and I was awakened by Mr. Peters. And he asked me to come downstairs. And he took me downstairs and he told me to hush, don't say a word. And he took off my clothes and he took off his clothes as well too. And he started to gyrate on me, his body on my body, and asked me if I like it, etc. And I didn't respond, because I was shocked. I'm a child. I didn't even know anything about that. It was new to me. This is new to me, And as I mentioned, many times when he would have gone downstairs with other persons, I didn't think of anything because these things were not even in my mind.
And
But when I get older,
the boys in the dorm, the boys in St. Martin's house, they would never talk about it amongst themselves.
Oh no, you would not. No, you would not hear anything because, well, I can tell you from in my case, I don't know if this would have happened with other persons, but as I told you before, Mr. Peters was very feared. Right, he was a very feared person among the boys. We all afraid him, and in my situation, he would have threatened me and told me not to say anything to anyone. If he does, if I do, he will deal with me. And when Mr. Peters tells you he will deal with you, Mr. Peters will deal with you.
Okay. So you're letting us know about the first incident. So you naked, he was naked, and he began to rub against you and ask you whether you were feeling good or not, and you didn't respond.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't respond because I didn't know what to say. I just kept quiet because it's Mr. Peters. I don't want to get licked. And I just kept quiet. And I'll be honest with you, at that point in time and at my age, I didn't know what was actually happening. I didn't know whether it was right or not. So that had happened. That was the first time. And then there was another occasion that he waked me up because nothing was said. And then there was another occasion I was waked up while I was asleep, asked again to come downstairs. This is when Mr. Peters worked in the 10 to 6 shift, right? And that similar act, was perpetrated against me. And then there was third occasion, right, and this was the third and final occasion where he attempted to have penetrated sex with me. It didn't happen because I was crying. I was a child, I didn't know what was happening and I was in a lot of pain. And he told me to hush my mouth, and then he ended up telling me to go upstairs and again, always threatened. And then I never said anything to anyone. I didn't say anything. My behavioral pattern had changed in school, because this, what had happened to me on the 3 occasions at the hands of Mr. Peters started to have an effect on me. And my school teacher, my primary school teacher, which was Miss Ledgerwood, she realized that something is wrong with Karen. I'm not doing as well as I usually do. I am not paying attention in school, and she needed to find out what had happened. And I held back. And then there was this one time that I decided to talk. And I told her what had happened. And I told her how I was afraid and that I was threatened not to say anything, and she assured me that they're going to deal with it. So what had happened, and I remember this chain of events, is that almost immediately I was taken to what you would call like the head supervisor, a lady called Miss Jones, right? She was the person in charge of the entire main shift. So like the maintenance, the bakery, the gardening, the plumbing, etc. She was the person in charge of them, right? And they took me to her office. And I told Miss Jones, I relayed what had transpired, and Miss Jones' office is located right next to the welfare officer's office, right? So then they called in the welfare officer. Now I am really, really scared, still frightened, don't know what to say, what to do, but it just came out on that occasion. And when I did mention it, and I talked about what had transpired, it would have reached to the management, Sister Marina Surratt, Francisca Marina Surratt is her name. That's her whole name. I remember it so good. I mean, I was surprised that the report didn't have her first name, which is Francisca, and I remembered it very much well. She was the manager at the time. She was like the manager for eternity. Because, I mean, even years after I left, she was still the manager there. And she was made aware of the situation, and based on my analysis of the situation, because I can remember like it happened yesterday, right, is that everyone was so busy and so concerned based on what they had heard. Something was definitely wrong, because we know Karen, that's not how he behaves. He has, I'm well behaved in school, yeah. I'm well attentive. I always excel in my studies, etc. But that was not happening. So they knew that something had to be happening. Something was preventing me from excelling in the way I usually do. So things got really busy. This is me sitting in the welfare officer's office, and they immediately called Mr. Peters. He wasn't working that day, right? No. I know when I realized what had happened, what was happening, I got even more scared, because I'm saying next minute he denies this and said that I am just making this up, and then nothing happens, and then back to the department, and I'm going to get licked. Mr. Peters is going to deal with me because he warned me not to say anything to anyone, because he will deal with me. And it so turned out that, and I'm telling you this because even though I was a child, I still remember this. Mr. Peters was called in, and they had him in the next office from where I was. And they were questioning him in the office there, and it so happened that Mr. Peters surprisingly admitted to what he did. Right? He admitted to what he did, and what was even surprising to me, right, is that he admitted to sexually abusing other boys as well. So when that was told to me, I was asked questions like if I knew of anybody else, and that's the time when it started to resonate with me that, listen, remember those times when you would have seen Mr. Peters, persons going downstairs in the night, the bigger boys downstairs with Mr. Peters? Maybe that's what was happening downstairs in the dark. So I started to tell them what I would have seen and what I would have observed while lying down on my bed, because my bed was right to the end, close to where the staircase is, so I could have seen, so even if my head is turned this way, and I play and I'm sleeping, because sometimes you have to give Mr. Peters a cat nap, because if Mr. Peters only see I open this belt, and I would see boys going downstairs, so I would have mentioned this to them, and the end result was that Mr. Peters was asked to resign.
Did any of the other boys eventually give their side of the story, or was it just you that would have spoken up?
To be honest with you, I can't say, because it was not told to me. I was not aware of it, but I just knew of myself, and I just spoke about what I had observed in the past, leading up to what had transpired with me, and I don't know if other boys had spoken about it, but I'll tell you this, I have spoken to other boys, post St. Dominic's Children's Home, and they would have told me, at least there was one boy who had told me that, he was one of them who used to go home by Mr. Peters. Going home by a member of staff on a weekend, it's a privilege. It's something you as a child look forward to, because you're there in this institution 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not a prison, because the wall is right there. If you want, you could jump and go, but people really go. And St. Martin's is right next to St. Jude's, so you find sometimes some boys would go across to St. Jude's, jump the wall and go across to St. Jude's, etc. So it was a privilege. It's something we all look forward to. So there's no doubt that a lot of boys would have been excited to go. A lot of people would have had trust in Mr. Peters. We looked at Mr. Peters as a role model, being an ex-resident of the institution as well too, passed through the system, went out, did his studies, came back to work and help children in the same system. So we looked at Mr. Peters, we had him in high esteem. So this boy had told me that he was one of the boys who would have gone home, and he would have been abused. And not only him, there were other boys who would have been abused. Mr. Peters would have taken turns in abusing them at his own home. This was told to me as an adult on the outside. Now, the story doesn't end there yet, where the abuse is concerned. Right? So Mr. Peters was asked to resign. He did resign. With immediate effect.
Was there ever
that was a sigh of relief.
Was there ever a police report, or did you ever have to make a report to the police, or there was no police report?
Absolutely, there was no police report. I was never taken to be medically examined, and now that I'm an adult and having an understanding and appreciation of these things and how the system is designed to work, how these things are supposed to work, I'm like, someone dropped the ball. The institution themselves covered up the entire incident because the police were never called. I was never even sent for medical examination to even ascertain, whether what I was saying is true or not, But they accepted it which means they would have had some sort of information or before, perhaps, to accept it separate and apart from Mr. Peters admitting to what he did. So being an adult now, I realize that the institution failed tremendously, in fulfilling their mandate, in protecting the children and ensuring that persons who abuse them, in the case of Mr. Peters, are held accountable. And before I continue with what had transpired after that, I had seen in the report that was posted on your page that where Justice Jude Jones, I can't remember who had said it, right? But I had seen in the report that in specific references in Dominic's Children's Home that the institution itself had assisted Mr. Peters in seeking employment elsewhere.
Yes.
That is quite a fact. I can tell you for today now, Mr. Peters is a manager at the Port of Spain General Hospital. I can tell you that for a fact. He is a manager. He's in a managerial position at the Port of Spain General Hospital. He did work at St. Anne's at some point in time because I believe he was assigned to the mental health section, and he did work at the Pembroke Street outpatient where, mental health facility as well too, where just opposite the prison there. But I can tell you now he's a manager at the Port of Spain General Hospital.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I want to be honest with you. I only recently these memories and the atrocities, as I would refer to it, which I was subjected to, and not only myself, other persons, really hit me when the report came out. Now, it came back to me a few years ago, and I'll tell you this how it came back to me, right? At a point in time, I believe that based on what had transpired with me at the hands of Mr. Peters, it had affected my lifestyle to an extent, right? And I will say this, I am married, I have a child, right? But at one point in time, I became attractive to the other sex. I never knew myself like that before, right? So I'm almost certain that this particular incident is what sort of led me down to that particular path. Now, I remember some years ago,
So are you saying
I was in,
that in orientation wise you are bisexual, or you are heterosexual but bi-curious, and you think that your experience as a child has led to that? Is that what you're saying?
no, what I'm saying is that at one point in time, I believe I would have been bisexual. I would have seen myself that way because I had girlfriends even when I came out of the institution, even while I was at the institution as well too, right? And this brings me back to the issue I was going to raise just now, is that at a point in time when I was in my teens still, a friend of mine, now this is me still being bisexual, right? A friend of mine had invited me to let's go to this party, this escape club or something like that. I've never been to it before, nothing like that. And I say, look, let me go, because I've never been to a party in my life or anything, right? And when I did go to the party, who did you think I saw there? Mr. Peters was at the party. And this is what Mr. Peters said to me. And it struck me, and today, for the rest of my life, I will always remember this. Mr. Peters' exact words were, look at you. You make me lost my work. You say you didn't like the thing from a long time. And that statement he made remained with me, it has remained with me for the rest of my life. Because I would have thought that I knew, and I mean now, and when I got much older, that he was in a position, right, to be responsible, a position of authority to protect young children, and he violated that. And in so doing, and even after that fact, as opposed to meeting me and apologizing about what transpired, you make these statements that you see you didn't like it a long time, what you sent to complain about. Look at you now. So I felt really, 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 really terrible. And a few months ago, it came back to me. Sometimes when I say that statement actually resonated with me, and that is when I decided to try to get my story out there. So it's not just a situation of me now coming forward now that the Jude Jones report and other reports are out there speaking about these atrocious events. I did make attempts to have my story broadcasted, and it came about when some time ago there was some allegations someone had made with regarding to a Roman Catholic priest, right, at Monk St. Benedict, yes, right? And the archdiocese had said it was investigating the allegations, etc. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa, I was a victim. I was a victim. Now I'll tell you this. I'm going to call a name of someone I know you're going to be very much well familiar with the person. I'm going to call them by their nickname. The person is now deceased, Saucy Powell. You familiar with that name? Saucy Powell? Right, Kevin Darlington.
I interviewed Kevin.
Kevin Darlington.
Yeah.
Kevin was in the same department as I was in at the same time when I was there in St. Martin's. That's correct.
Okay.
At St. Dominic's Children's Home in the St. Martin's department, which is the same department Mr. Peters worked at, which is the same unit.
And you say Kevin was there while you were there?
Yes, he was.
Was Kevin ever one of the boys that spent weekends with Mr. Peters, or he was just there? He was just there in the dormitory.
I can't recall if he was any of them who spent weekends with him, but I know he was there in the dormitory, and he was one of, like, a helper. He would be one you would go to to get things done, you want to help serve the breakfast, etc., Kevin would be the person who would do these things.
So he was
So Kevin was always
He was also one of the wards of the state at that point in time, or he was working.
That's correct. No, he was a ward of the state at that point in time.
But he was
That's quite
older than-
correct.
Was he older than you?
Yes, he was a little older than me. Probably by a year or two. Yeah.
Karen, why is it so important for you to tell your story now? Because if by your accounts, what would have happened to you happened mid-90s, right? So let's say, because you're saying
That's correct.
common entrance, so 94, 95, 96, somewhere thereabouts, it would have occurred. We're now in
That's correct.
2022. So more than 20 years has passed. Why is it important for you to discuss it now?
It's important. I felt it's important to come forward and speak now because, as I said to you before, I tried to get my story out. It didn't really gather much attention as I would have wanted to because I really felt that persons who abuse their authority in such a manner should be held accountable. And it had never happened. And I believe now, as an adult, that the institution would have covered it at the management of the institution because it may fact that the police would never call them. The police would never call them. People need to know what transpired, what has been happening, and the role that the management of the institutions play as well too. Because, no one is going to say that these things cannot happen at all. But then when they come to your attention as the management of the institution, you have a responsibility to take decisive action and deal with it. No, and this brings me back to something I heard Sister Arlene had said recently on TV6, where she was saying that she feels that
Who is Sister Arlene?
The audience.
Sister Arlene Greenwich, she is the manager of St. Dominic Children's Home now. She has been there for quite some time. She was the person who would have replaced Sister Marina, right? She had said that she felt that the staff, right, the board, right, because that'll be the Roman Catholic board runs the institution, and the institution would receive subventions from the government, right? The Roman Catholic board should be given much more autonomy to handle its affairs, the hiring, discipline of its staff, etc. And I believe that's a no-no. When I saw that, I said they didn't even have the ability, they didn't even have they didn't even have what it takes to really, what they have, their actions in the past have not even demonstrated that they're actually capable of doing such. Because as it is now, and as it has always been, is that, and this is something that I have known, I have researched these things, the Statutory Authority of Service Commission is the one that actually employs the staff members and send them to these various institutions. So she is asking, that's quite correct. So she is asking for the doing away of the statutory authorities, the SASC as they refer to them, dealing with the hiring, disciplining, the firing of staff members. And I think that should not be something that should be allowed to happen because for far too long, incidents of such a nature has been happening at these institutions, and they have not shown that they have what it takes to really deal with these things. Because at the end of the thing is, the SASC should have been informed about Mr. Peters' actions. They were never. They asked Mr. Peters to resign quietly, which he did immediately, and he left the institution, and they even went on to help him, assist him, give him recommendations in getting employment in another government institution. So I felt it's really important to really come forward because people need to hear, not just simply from a Justice Jude Jones report or any other report at all.
Hear from an actual victim.
That's quite correct.
Have you?
And I have absolutely no motive, absolutely no underlying motives at all. I just want people to hear, know and understand what has transpired and what has been transpired and the extent at which the management has gone to cover it up.
Have you at any point in time ever considered, pressing charges against Mr. Peters, or even taking the home to court or anything like that for what happened to you?
I'll tell you something. I have considered it. I considered it last year, But then when I looked at the statutory framework for bringing these matters before the court, it would have been long expired. You know, I have thought about it. Now, I'm not too sure. I believe that where sexual offences are concerned, there's no statutory limit in law with respect to investigating and prosecuting. But the issue now remains is that there would be perhaps no evidence to support except what I'm saying now, what had transpired, because I know that the administration of the home was destroyed by a fire. I was there when it happened, and I would believe that if there were any reports, because I told you Mr. Peters was asked to resign quietly, the matter was never reported to the police, so there's a possibility that the home probably may not have even had any records with any report. If there were any, that in itself would have been destroyed. But I have thought about it, because as I said, I felt it's important that people in society who are trusted in these institutions and in such positions need to understand that there are serious consequences to your actions.
Agreed. And what about you personally? What have you done by way of treating with what has been done with you, but done to you? Sorry, because it has had an impact on you. So you mentioned that when it took place, you know, there was no medical exam, you know, there was no checkup, nothing. In the aftermath, having left the home, you're now on your own, you're now an adult. Have you done any counseling? Have you done any therapy or anything like that?
To be honest with you, just as what had happened in the home, I just went on with my life as usual. That is what has happened with me. I've been honest with you, I have only spoken to, I have never even mentioned this to my wife. I'll tell you this, and before I continue with this.
Does she know now?
No, she doesn't.
Okay.
I have never mentioned it to her. My relatives don't know about what had transpired to me. And I'll tell you this, I mean, me, myself being a child, at the time this happening to me, my grandmother used to come to the home. She would take me home for weekends and stuff, and then when I'm by her, my mom would come for me, I would go by her, etc. The home did not even inform my grandmother. And so she was my next of kin listed in the institution, and they never even mentioned to her what had happened. You know, nothing. So I have never really mentioned it. I have spoken to one person about it sometime last year, you know, a very good friend of mine, and that's just where it ended, you know, and I've just decided to use a particular Facebook page to try to get my story out, and then when I realized it wasn't really going much anywhere, I just left it at that, and then Justice Judith Jones' report is made public, and then I saw on your Facebook page a particular script, a particular section which is runs to this in Dominic
Sabga,
and so on, what
Sabga
transpired.
That's
it. That's quite correct. And I was alarmed. I was like, whoa, they knew about this. I mean, I was the person who actually blew the lid on this, you know? And in Mr. Peters' word, you was the one who made me lose my job, you know? So, and then I said to myself that people really need to hear from the actual victim.
So then that means the home would have told him that you were the one that made the report. If you can say that to you, because in the report, the executive summary, in it they say that he would have abused 30 to 40 boys at the home. So for him to say to you what he said to you when he met you all those years after, he had to have been told that it was you, or you know, he had to have some sense that you were because it's 30.
I was the informant.
Yeah, he had to have.
That's quite correct. And I'll tell you this, and to substantiate that, and it's reasonable to assume that he was told, after Mr. Peters would have left, your one or two staff members would have said to me, you made Mr. Peters lose his work. So they knew. Mr. Peters was an all-time favorite. He was a favorite in the institution. He was one of management's favorite staff members.
So how did you end up leaving the home before the age of 18? Because what I'm trying to understand is, you would have explained earlier on that there was something happening at the home and the state moved you out to the home. On weekends you would go to your grandmother and
That's correct.
you would be able to see your mom. So when you were the age of 13, 14, thereabouts, when you were discharged from the home, how did that come about? How did that happen?
But to my surprise, there was some time I was called to the welfare office, and the welfare officer had mentioned to me that she was in communication with my grandmother, she was in communication with my mom, and they were seeking to discharge me from the home. I'm still young, I'm still a child, so I'm like, okay, no problem. And they would have she would have spoken to my mom and my stepfather, and he would have agreed for me to come and stay there, and that's how I was discharged.
Okay.
And that was not too long after the incident had occurred, like just about a year or so after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Karen, it's 2022, you're married, you have a child now. How are you moving forward, or how have you moved forward?
Well, as I said, all these years, myself being an adult, I have never really given much thought to what had transpired to me in my childhood. But it's only when the issue is raised publicly that's when it hits me like a ton of brick, because as I mentioned to you sometime last year, there was the allegation of someone with respect to a priest, abusing them. Oh, and just before I forget, as I said priest. So for some reason, not too long after the incident, with regards to Mr. Peters, and he had left, etc., etc., I was an acolyte at the church there, so I would sometimes clean the church, prepare the sacristy, etc., the communion, everything in the church, and it appeared to me that the resident priest at the time would have been informed of what had transpired to me with respect to Mr. Peters. And I was abused. I was physically abused by the priest himself.
How so?
Yeah, in the sacristy of the church.
When you say
That's
physical,
where it happened.
you were beaten by the priest?
No, he sexually abused me in the sacristy of the church. So he started to ask me about what had happened. So I was like, give the opinion. Okay, so they explained to the priest. The priest and I would have have a good relationship because they're in the church when the acolytes are there close by, we do stuff, etc., etc. Right? So me now being an acolyte, I want to become a priest. Almost every acolyte at my age would definitely want to become a priest because we sort of look at them as role models, etc. And was speaking to me. A Saturday I was cleaning and sometimes I used to clean the church effectively and by myself. I didn't really like people to help me because people would drag their feet, they wouldn't do things in a certain way. So I used to clean the entire church by myself, and I used to do. So the priest had came one Saturday, and was talking to me, and he had mentioned that he was told what had transpired to me, etc. And he had started to ask me how I felt about the situation, etc. So I started to open up to him, only to realize that he used my vulnerable moment, and he himself made advances towards me and sexually abused me right in the sacristy of the church. The sacristy is the little compartment behind where the priests go in, where you keep your candles, etc., your gongs, etc. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just left it as that. And
In what form did the overtures take?
well, he started to touch me. He started to kiss me, touch me very inappropriate, took off my clothes, interfered with my private parts, even placed them in his mouth. That's what happened to me in the sacristy. So I am now, when I get much older, I'm a victim of sexual abuse. You're an adult, you're a role model, and you're informed of it for whatever reason. I don't know who told him and the reasons why they told him. As I said, I assumed it's probably for him to probably talk to me, lecture me, counsel me. And then little did I know I would have been subjected to it a second time by someone in authority.
Did you say anything to anybody after it happened?
I did not. No, I didn't. But I stopped. I left being acolyte, and I joined the choir. So I started to play the guitar in the choir. So I was away from that sort of thing. But I didn't mention it to anybody because I didn't want it to be accused the second time of someone losing their job. Because I was accused, as I told you before, I was accused by some staff members who would have told me I made Mr. Peters use his job, which is something I didn't really take on.
Were you? When staff members were saying things like that to you, did it ever make you feel worried, make you feel unsafe, make you feel scared?
Not really, because I'll tell you why. Because Mr. Peters was not wrong.
Ah, okay.
Mr. Peters was the one we were all afraid of. We were all fearful. So I just never really took it on, and I just moved on. There were times I was awarded with privileges where I would be given opportunities to work at the reception at the administration on a weekend, because the receptionist is not there on a weekend. So usually they use residents. Sometimes it might be a girl from the Bethlehem department or someone from Margaretti, and a lot of times sister would allow me, whoever is the duty person in charge of the institution on the weekend would call me and ask me to, and I would be happy because it's a privilege. You can answer the phone, you can meet people, you can do things. It's really, really nice. You get treats, you get snacks, you get a lot of tangible stuff. Yeah.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Are there any closing words from you? Anything else you would want to share with the audience?
I would just hope. I know how we say in Trinidad and Tobago, when there's an issue about something, it lasts about 2 weeks and then we don't hear about it again. I would really hope that decisive measures are implemented to deal with these things, to monitor homes, monitor children, and to also hold accountable those who neglect in their duties, particularly the management of the institutions. Because as I told you in my case, the management of St. Dominic's was fully aware of it. I spoke with the manager at the time, was Sister Marina. They knew about it, but they did absolutely nothing. So I just want people to be conscious, to understand that incidents of such nature are real. They happen, they have happened, and the powers that be, don't just say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Let's see something actually happening.
Something just occurred to me. Subsequent to the incidents happening, so not necessarily the report taking place, did you not feel comfortable enough to tell your grandmother or your mother what had transpired?
Actually, even to this date, I don't feel comfortable. It's a dark and, a dirty secret that I choose to keep to myself. I only mentioned it.
Do you think it would hurt them? Is that why you wouldn't talk about it?
I don't know if it's because the way I've grown up to be sort of secretive with respect to most of my lifestyle. So it's something I just wouldn't tell them. I don't know what their reaction would perhaps be, but it's something that I just don't see me mentioning to them, not even in the near distant future.
I hear you. Thanks for sharing your story.
Sure.
Folks, so there you have it. Excerpts from the report, first-person accounts from a young lady who worked at the St. Jude's home, and first-person accounts from a young man who experienced physical, verbal, psychological, and sexual abuse at a state home. We are failing our children, and we're failing our children generation after generation. Children are the most vulnerable group that we have in our society. Children that don't have parents, so orphans or children that are being fostered, are even more vulnerable because there are no adults around who are genetically related to them to do battle for them. And the stories that we would have listened here this afternoon are very, very, very troubling, because it says something about who we are as a society, what we are as a culture and a civilization. we are eating our young alive. That's what we're doing. When you've decided that you're going to prey on your most vulnerable, little children, a boy who getting ready to do common entrance, so 10, 11, 12 years of age, you look at him and you decide, I am going to sexually abuse this child. We eating we own young. And we need to pause and think about what that is saying about us. And we also need to think about how that kind of atrocity, that kind of generational abuse, generational trauma, how it is making us into the violent society that we see in today. Because we see the headlines on the newspapers and we keep asking, how we reach here, how we reach here. Well, after you listen to Karen's story and you understand that the head of the church, management at the home, and public servants are not doing their jobs, not pulling their weight. No police report was made, no medical examination took place, no psychological counseling or help for him. And when he opened up to a priest, what did the priest do? The priest also sexually abused him. So we need to stop and think about these things. We need to think about what we've done, where we go in, and also what we are not doing, because there is a lot that we are not doing. We are allowing too many things to go unpunished, undealt with, swept under the rug, and that is not a good look. We are truly failing our children and ourselves. So this is where I wrap things up. I will see you guys on Friday. I hope you all enjoyed today's live.